So the end of chapter 3, Jane realizes that Mrs. Reed has agreed to send her off to school, so things are looking up. But when we get into chapter 4, we realize that several months have passed. She's still not sent to school, and it seems as though her life has become less enjoyable because she is being forced to sleep in a closet. She cannot eat her meals with everyone else. She must eat alone. And John, Eliza, and Georgiana have been directed by Mrs. Reed to kind of ignore Jane's existence. Jane starts to talk about this doll that she has. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt here. It says, "To this crib I always took my doll. Human beings must love something. And in the dearth of worthier objects of affection, I contrived to find a pleasure in loving and cherishing a faded graven image, shabby as a miniature scarecrow. It puzzles me now to remember with what absurd sincerity I doted on this little toy, half fancying it alive and capable of sensation. I could not sleep unless it was folded in my nightgown, and when it lay there safe and warm, I was comparatively happy, believing it to be happy likewise." So remember, Jane is 10 years old, and by using this in the story, it kind of reinforces Jane's need and desire for love and affection because she's not receiving that in her life right now. She has no one to turn to. Her uncle's gone, and she's not being treated in a loving and caring way. Next, we're introduced to a new character that we haven't seen before. His name is Mr. Brocklehurst, and he arrives at the home, and Jane is summoned to speak to him, and Mrs. Reed is there as well. And she's kind of interrogated by this man, and this man is the founder of the Lowood school that she will be attending. They start asking her these questions. Are you a good child? Do you know what hell is? How do you avoid hell? Jane wittily responds, I must keep in good health and not die. So she's got her sense of humor going for her, but that is not seen as the proper way that a young lady should act. And he's trying to instill the fear of God in her, I feel like. And it also brings it back to this theme that if you are not a good child and if you do not submit to the will of others, both emotionally and physically, then you're not worthy. You're not worthy of love. And I think that's a major theme that's going on here. Then Mrs. Reed boldly declares a bald-faced lie about Jane. So she's explaining how Jane is, in her eyes, I guess, to Mr. Brocklehurst. And she explains that Jane's worst fault is that she has a tendency to deceit, which is ironic because thus far Jane has completely told the truth. She's told the truth in the narrative voice. She's told the truth in dialogue with other characters. She's combated against fabrications. We know that the only deceitful person in this scene is Mrs. Reed herself. But this just gets Jane's blood boiling, but she is in the presence of the founder of the school that she knows she's going to be attending, so she kind of has to bite her tongue, and she just waits out the rest of the conversation, and yeah, as they decide her fate of what's going to happen, she just stands there and she waits, but her insides are fuming. Then Mr. Brocklehurst leaves, and Jane is finally able to respond to the lie that has been told against her. I am not deceitful. If I were, I should say I loved you, but I declare I do not love you. I dislike you the worst of anybody in the world except John Reed. And this book about the liar you may give to your girl, Georgiana, for it is she who tells lies and not I. A little further on, I am glad you are no relation of mine. I will never call you aunt again as long as I live. I will never come to see you when I am grown up, and if anyone asks me how I liked you and how you treated me, I will say the very thought of you makes me sick and that you treated me with miserable cruelty. How dare I misread? How dare I? Because it is the truth. You think I have no feelings and that I can do without one bit of love or kindness, but I cannot live so. And you have no pity. I shall remember how you thrust me back, roughly and violently thrust me back into the red room and locked me up there to my dying day, though I was in agony, though I cried out while suffocating with distress, have mercy, Aunt Reed, and that punishment you made me suffer because your wicked boy struck me, knocked me down for nothing. I will tell anybody who asks me questions this exact tale. People think you a good woman, but you are bad, hard-hearted. You are deceitful. And then she follows through, after this dialogue, she follows through with how she felt about that exclamation towards Mrs. Reed. Ere I had finished this reply, my soul began to expand, to exult with the strangest sense of freedom, of triumph I ever felt. It seemed as if an invisible bond had burst and that I had struggled out into unhoped for liberty. So this passionate outburst it reveals her longing for freedom, even if she hasn't fully realized what that's manifesting itself into. She is beginning this story with a lie that she believes, a lie that she believes um, that she is not worthy of love. You know, she's got so many people in her life that are feeding into this lie by their behaviors and actions and words themselves. So after that happens, she basically shuts Mrs. Reed up and she leaves the scene. And Jane's left there with her feelings. And she's feeling really, really great at this point. She feels a sense of freedom. And that's wonderful for her character development. She's changing. She's becoming more emboldened and empowered. So it goes on from there to a conversation with her and Bessie, and she has kind of prefaced this with the fact that Bessie is her favorite out of everyone in the house. Bessie's the one that shows her the most amount of kindness and pays attention to her, period. But at the end, Bessie is giving her some encouragement, and she's not feeding into that lie that Jane is not worthy. She's doing the direct opposite. She's on Jane's side and she's wanting her to stand up for herself. So the end of chapter 4 goes like this. That afternoon lapsed in peace and harmony, and in the evening Bessie told me some of her most enchanting stories and sang me some of her sweetest songs. Even for me, life had its gleams of sunshine. So we have hope. We have hope. Jane has hope. And that's important for a character's development. There has to be the possibility of change. And we see that in Jane. We most definitely see that in Jane. In chapter 5, it starts with Jane getting up before dawn and getting dressed because a coach is arriving to pick her up around 6 in the morning. Bessie's the only one that gets up and sends her off to travel alone. The distance between the Reeds and the Lowood School is around 50 miles. So Jane, a 10-year-old girl, is sent to travel alone. And she does display a sense of weariness. She talks about the fear of being kidnapped. So you can imagine how scary it would be for a 10-year-old to travel that far alone. She finally arrives at the Lowood School in the evening hours. She gets to observe the other schoolgirls, and what they're wearing, how they're behaving. The daily routines of the schoolgirls occupy their time from before dawn until dinner. And we see the girls being served burnt porridge. It's very disgusting. It smells really bad. They're not being offered anything else as an alternative. It's kind of you eat it or you go hungry. Um, the lessons are they seem to be very extensive. I mean, every single hour is planned out for their day. So we quickly realized that this is not a normal school, and Jane actually befriends this girl. Her name is Helen, and she's a little bit older than Jane, but she sees that Helen is reading this book, and she finds the connection with her and this girl because she too shares the love of reading. So that kind of opens up the conversation between the two. Further along in the conversation, though, Helen explains to Jane what a charity school is, and a charity school is for an orphan, someone that has lost one or both of their parents and are basically sent to the school at no charge because through things such as donations and other things like that, other people that support the school, other family members do not have to pay the school. So she she quickly realizes why Mrs. Reed has chosen this school for her. Now in chapter 6, it opens with the second morning that Jane has experienced at the school. She talks about being really hungry, wishing that she got double the portion of what she was fed for breakfast. So the girls are underfed, they are overworked, they're being forced to behave in certain ways. They have to sit still for long durations during their lessons. And life is harsh for the girls at Lowood School. So Jane begins to notice this harsh treatment of her new friend Helen by one of the teachers. And Helen is surprisingly not reacting in a way that Jane probably feels that she would react if those injustices were placed upon her. So she's very disturbed by it, and she's able to see a very harsh punishment inflicted upon Helen by Miss Scatcherd. Miss Scatcherd demands her to go into the next room to get these twigs that have been binded together. Helen brings them back, hands them over, and accepts a physical punishment. I think it's called being flogged, but the teacher takes the twigs and smacks her on the neck with them. And she doesn't show any reaction. But later on, Jane notices a tear that rolls down Helen's cheek. So later on, after this happens, Helen and Jane get into this long-winded dialogue about the punishments and how you should react to them. So Jane responds and says, if you are good to those who are good to you. It is all I ever desire to be. If people were always kind and obedient to those who are cruel and unjust, the wicked people would have it all their own way. They would never feel afraid, and so they would never alter, but would grow worse and worse. When we are struck at without a reason, we should strike back again very hard. I am sure we should, so hard as to teach the person who struck us never to do it again. And then Helen comes back and says, heathens and savage tribes hold that doctrine, but Christians and civilized nations disown it. Love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you and despitefully use you. Then Jane says, then I should love Mrs. Reed, which I cannot do. I should bless her son John, which is impossible. And then Helen responds, Would you not be happier if you tried to forget her severity? Together with the passionate emotions it excited, life appears to me too short to be spent in nursing animosity or registering wrongs. So I see both sides to their arguments. There's some good things about what Helen's saying, and there's also some good things about what Jane's saying. So I feel like this character is introduced in the story to kind of propel her capacity for change, because if no one's around and there's no other experiences to be had, then how is someone able or capable of changing for the better? And Helen is one of those characters that comes around and helps her to see things more clearly and to change for the better. So Jane, all the while, is concerned with Helen basically enduring this sort of harsh treatment, and then Helen's all the while trying to explain to Jane that she's going to have to choose this route if she is to continue to stay here and survive. So I think that they're giving each other good advice, but more so from Helen's perspective, she is trying to help Jane get along in these next years that are coming in her life. So, how do you guys feel about Helen? I think that she's wonderful. As a 10-year-old going into a new school, having someone older there to kind of guide you and give you good advice is very important. And I feel like someone a friend that comes in with an alternative perspective on things and really tries from their side to get you to understand the way things work and try to help you kind of shape your beliefs on certain issues and matters. I think that's more valuable in a friend than versus a friend that is agreeable and doesn't really have an opinion. Or if they do, they don't share that opinion with you because they're afraid for some reason of speaking their own truth and they just want you to like them. So the fact that Helen is able to disagree with Jane is very important, and that's good for the dialogue in the book. That's good for Jane's progress and her capability to change into a better version of herself. So yeah, how do you guys feel about Helen?